Welcome to the William & Mary Center for Innovation and Learning Design Virtual Summit on Deeper Learning. When we come across an idea like deeper learning that's really powerful for our students and for our teachers, it's only natural that we want to spread it. Take it back to our classrooms, spread it in our school, maybe even beyond the school district, the state, to make it a reality for students everywhere. But as we all know, change can be hard, particularly in schools. Fortunately today, we have a wonderful interview with Michael Fullan, international change expert. Provides some great resources, ideas for how to think about spreading deeper learning practices. More importantly though, and what I really took away from the experience, was the importance of collaboration, conversation, and developing a shared vision for deeper learning across all the stakeholders involved in education. As you watch today, I encourage you to tweet at MichaelFullan1, at WMSILD, and use the hashtag SILDSummit. Share your ideas, questions, reactions. I know there's going to be a lot that you're going to take away today. You're going to be really inspired to work together to bring deeper learning practices to your setting. It is my pleasure to welcome Michael Fullan here to our virtual summit here on deeper learning. Michael is the former dean of the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. He's recognized as a worldwide authority on educational reform, advises policymakers and local leaders around the world in helping to achieve the moral purpose of all children learning. I first became aware of Michael's work when I read his book, Leading in a Culture of Change, back in 2002. And I was really excited to see his more recent work as an advisor to the Premier Minister of Education in Ontario and as co-leader of the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning Global Initiative. And the 2014 manuscript that he co-authored with Maria Langworthy, A Rich Seam, How New Pedagogies Find Deep Learning, is absolutely a must-read for teachers and school leaders interested in encouraging deeper learning in their schools and their classrooms. So I'm absolutely delighted to talk with you today, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Mark. It's great to catch up, and there's a lot happening, as you know, so there's an opportunity to capture some of it.
Absolutely, and hopefully this will reach some different audiences. We had the opportunity, or I had the opportunity to see you speak at the Hewlett Foundation conference in December, and a lot of ideas that we've been thinking about really started to crystallize. So I'm delighted to have the chance to kind of dig a little deeper with you. So,
okay, get your shovel out there.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
So let's start sort of with a big picture question. Is just how did you become, because you're most known, I think, for leading change and sort of the leadership aspect. How did you become so interested in deep learning, and what does that actually mean to you? Because I think there's a lot of different conceptions for folks around the world.
Yeah, it is a fairly new term recently in the last 3 or 4 years, and it has a lot of different meanings, as you say. So first, I would like to comment on, I'll call it our modus operandi, the work, how we go about our work, because that's an important as we get these discoveries. And it goes like this: we team up with chunks of the system, usually big chunks, like more than districts, sometimes provinces or states, or certainly combinations of districts. And so we team up, we do work together, and then afterwards I write a book about it. And then we team up again and do it better the next time, and then I write another book. So the point is, it's practice chasing theory, but it also means you're constantly discovering things because you're teaming up, as I said, to do these things. So each time you'll get an advance opportunity, I would put it, to read the tea leaves, what's coming. And that's how we've been working on whole system change. We've been working on changing pedagogy that's more engaging for students and teachers, and also on linking the pathways, I'll say causal pathways, to measurable learning outcomes, especially some of the new learning outcomes that we now call the global competencies. So it's through that I wrote a slim book called Stratosphere. 4 years ago. It was integrating technology, change, leadership, and pedagogy. I said these three things need to go together. They aren't going together. When they do, good things will happen. So that's how we opened it up, so to speak. And then we began to just the definition of deep learning. And we're working on this again and again. But basically, it has two parts for us. One is the nature of the learning process itself, so the pedagogy, let's call it. We define it as a new learning partnership between and among students, teachers, and families. So we can talk about the content of that definition, the elements of it, but that's the pedagogy part, the learning part. And then the learning outcomes are what we now call the global competencies, the 6 C's, collaboration and communication and creativity and critical thinking. Those 4 have been around for a while, but they weren't going very far. We added 2 others, character education and citizenship. And when you add those, you get into real problems, real life issues, connection to students, new opportunities for pursuing and opening up a whole bunch of things. So there's a lot more to it than that, but basically this is turning the status quo upside down, I would say, and creating these clusters in our own. We have 1,000 schools in 7 different countries, and they work in clusters all over the place. And these clusters are where we have tools. We're enabling them to pursue deep learning. That's why they came in. But as we pursue it together, we're pulling out the learnings and they're representing it back to ourselves and to the world.
And, you know, just in multiple ways, just in that brief introduction, you talked about sort of that importance of partnering and collaboration. And I think so often in education, we work in silos, or we have this great sort of initiative in this particular school or this charter school. I love that idea of learning from each other and progressing forward together. Do you have any, I'd just be curious if you have any particular stories of where you really learned a lesson in that collaboration that really influenced your thinking in the next step, in that next iteration?
Yeah, well, let me start with a principle, I guess, of it. I was reading, I forget the reference now, but I was reading a report recently from business and initiatives, and it said it found this, that 80% of the best ideas come from your leading customers, was the language they use, not from the research lab, so to speak. So the principle here is we are finding the future already out there, the leading customers, if you like, or schools and districts that are doing this, and that's the principle. And then when you do that, just the most recent breakthrough, I say, there's 2 things that came recently from this work that we didn't have explicit in our framework. It was there, but it just jumped out at us by doing it. One is students as change agents. We wanted students to be more involved, but we never thought that they would run with it the way they do. Students ranging from age 6 to 16, for example, who are, I'll just give you a quick small story. There's a school in East End, Toronto called John A. Leslie. It's about 65% Bangladesh, up to grade 7 and 8. And they've been doing this great work for the last couple of years. The principal is a guy named Greg McLeod. And one day he walked into his office in the morning as principal. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. And on his desk was an iPad. And on the iPad was a sticky. It said, "Play me." So he played it. And it was as grade 1 students, these are 6 and 7-year-olds, using this language, I'm going to just paraphrase it, that we have ideas for changing our learning environment so we'll be more collaborative and focused. And here are our ideas. Wow. So that's just, I mean, that's just natural now that we're finding this, that they just come out. There's many stories like that. And the other big story that I call it the equity hypothesis that we have stumbled on, I guess I'll say, although with moral purpose, it's inevitable we'd be looking for this kind of thing, is the proposition, I call it a hypothesis even though we have data for it, that if you, if I were tweeting it as I did, it's this, attack inequity with excellence and all else will be covered. So it's a kind of don't dumb down, smarten up principle. And what it means is that the deep learning that we're doing is good for all, but it's especially good for those students that are already disconnected from schools, alienated, poverty, racism, whatever it is. It especially can reach those. So now we're able to go after that explicitly. And it could be a huge breakthrough because if you tie it also into the brain research, which is a lot of kids who have been mistreated, we know that there's neurological damage. We also know that to a certain extent it's reversible by certain strategies. So we're trying to pinpoint what that reverse looks like and produce lots of examples of it. So it's exciting.
And I think that's why maybe there's so much energy around this notion of deep learning, because it's not just about skills, but it really is about those connections and the changing relationship with teachers and students and the changing role, more agency for students in their learning. And I think that's why it's so inspiring, but also I think at the same time so challenging to encourage that idea and those practices to spread, particularly in high stakes testing environments. Is that something you've run up against? Because I absolutely, I've seen evidence exactly of what you're talking about, but I wonder if you get pushback from school leaders, teachers, that like, oh, I would love to do that, but.
Yeah, well, it's a big barrier, one could say, but I'm somewhat optimistic about it. Our experience goes like this. That to start with the obstacles, let's say, some of the obstacles are not just the testing system, but are built into the culture of schools. So somebody coined the phrase legacy pedagogy, and I adapted that to say legacy culture.
Right.
So what those two terms mean is we're used to doing it this way. A new thing comes along that would really redo the relationships quite radically. And even if I say I want to do that and I start to do it, I fall back to my old ways.
Right.
So that's one barrier, and that's the deepest one, because you're trying to make the change and you can't. That's one. The second is that there's now, because we're doing this with not just a few schools, we're mobilizing systems, I'm going to say. So there's a lot of legitimacy in the systems that I'm talking about. The 16 or so districts in Ontario, for example, each of them have 50 to 125 schools. So there's a lot of legitimacy at the multi-leadership level for this to happen. And when we're finding it's kind of a go slow to go fast, that at the beginning there's a bit of wariness about it because it's awkward. And then quickly, when you tap into the energy of students and other teachers, it takes off if you're enabling it. And that's what our system does, and enable it. So then it moves very rapidly after a slow kind of a stutter start, and then it moves really rapidly. So that's the good part. If you're in a system of high stakes testing, it is a serious problem. And I was in Texas yesterday working with a group, and Texas has a certain amount of this. But I would also say two things. One is we are conscious in our deep learning work that we want to have the test of, let's say, literacy and math to be part of the work, even though we're doing with the 6 competencies. If you're working on collaboration and real problems and applying it and trying to solve something that's local, you have to team up. You have to be literate. You have to be able to analyze projects and calculations and all that. So in that sense, the scores, if you want to put it that way, on literacy, for example, go up when you do deep learning. But you have to be conscious of that for political reasons as well as professional reasons. I think that's one avenue to get it. The second is the new, now that we've shifted from No Child Left Behind to ESSA, the ESSA framework, at least, I don't know what the different groups will do with it, but the ESSA framework is conducive to this new stuff. It is really not a constraint, it's really an enabler. And we work very fully in California. And California is moving away from dysfunctional test to enabling test and equity and all of that. So there's a lot of rapport we have. And California is big, as you know, 43 million people, 1,000 districts, complex to be sure, but it's on the move, and we spend a lot of time there helping people move forward.
Yeah, and I feel like in Virginia we're in much the same place. We can start to see the tide shift a little bit. There's a lot of interest around this. I was particularly interested to hear your concept of the change at multiple levels. And you'll explain it much better than I do, but the idea that bottom up, top down, and from the side. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, especially as we think about looking at capitalizing on this opportunity right now in Virginia as an example, as a case.
Yeah, it's a breakthrough concept for us, and it sounds complicated, but it's not. And we start with this notion, leadership from the middle. And if you think of the top as the state, individual local communities as the third level. The middle level are districts across Virginia in this case. And so we did find, and Andy Hargraves, one of my colleagues, was the first to discover this, that if top-down change we knew didn't work, bottom-up change, site-based management only got pieces, never really added up. Where's the glue? The glue is in the middle. So we had found in Ontario that a lot of the energy was coming from the 72 districts, including many of them working together. So we opened it up in the middle that way and said there's a new kind of drive coming from the middle. And then that got me to rethinking the system. And it goes like this, and I want to say it vertically, both going downward and then going upward to get the concepts here. Going downward, so to speak, vertically, the image is that you want to focus and shape the work of the level below you, state to district, district to school. So shape the work, and then in the course of the process, liberate or enable the liberation of energy. But it's not aimless, because I've also adapted Ronald Reagan's phrase, trust and verify, which he didn't trust the Russians. Our version is trust and interact. In other words, as long as you're interacting, a lot of this takes care of itself. So you get this this good cascading effect, if you like, because you've still got the focus, you've got the direction, but then you've got this opening part of the energy coming out of that. That's one way. When I flip it around and I look upward, the images are different, and they're empowering images, but they're compatible. So one of them, for example, is you want the level above you to like what you're doing, but not to run you. So you get, that. So that's another way we say it is, it's not your job to implement state policy if you're a principal or a district. It's your job to exploit it for local development. And there's lots of goals in state policy that are compatible with what locals want and need. So it's a really multiple. That's why it ends up being wherever you are, you want to look upward and be a better partner that way. But you also want to look downward and be an enabler that way. And then you start learning sideways, districts learning from each other. And in Virginia, for example, there was an article in this month, so this is February, right? February issue of the school administrator from one of your superintendents called a district that's leading the makers movement. I forget the district now, but you'll find it in that. I just saw it today. So there's a superintendent in Virginia that's deep learning and having the district be that. So that starts to be part of how they learn, how they can also learn laterally from other districts, and it becomes. And incidentally, we have another, I think, strategic breakthrough in the last month, which again we learned from doing this, is I've dropped the notion of going to scale because it's not a very good strategy. Let's take High Tech High, great school. It's spread to 7 campuses, whatever, fabulous, but it's slow because of it requires great quality, a lot of investment each step of the way. It'll never get there on a big system. And we have other examples now, and the phrase we're using is social movement. So what are the design characteristics of a social movement, especially an intentional one, which is what we can do. So this is how these ideas keep coming out of the woodwork when you do this, and they really are breakthrough ideas, I think, when you start adding them up. So I'm optimistic. I think the status quo will be seriously disrupted by this work in a good way.
Absolutely. And I think that maybe 2 keys, and one I'd love to get any thoughts that you have, is the idea of spreading practice to connect superintendents, to connect folks that are sort of in that middle level so that they can learn from each other, like you talked about earlier. And I think we're starting to see some mechanisms for that to happen. One question I'm wondering is from more at that bottom level for the school leader. We see, at least in the U.S., and I'm sure it's true around the world, is the role of the principal just expands and expands and expands. And it makes it, I think, more and more difficult to be an instructional leader. So how can, given that context, how can you encourage school leaders to be that supportive person in the building to encourage teachers to take risks and to feel supported as they embrace these new pedagogies?
Well, that's a good question. And a couple of years ago, I did a book called The Principle, Three Keys for Maximizing Impact. And in it, I took a look at the evolving role of the principal as instructional leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I first concluded that the research is being misinterpreted and it's going down the wrong path with the notion that the principal would be front and center all the time leading this. I called it micromanagement madness. That was coming because it was one-on-one teacher appraisal visiting and all of this. And to be clear on this, instructional rounds, for example, and those things, I said these are valuable for one main reason only, and that is for the professional learning of the principal, professional development. So it's valuable. I don't want to throw it out, but it's not the way to run the school. And with the way to run the school is, and just there's one phrase from that I use from the research that just nails it. It's the degree to which the principal participates as a learner. Teachers to move the school forward. So one of two big findings is this: participate as a learner. And what happens then is you learn a lot. You then start to use the group to change the group. The group gets stronger, the collective efficacy, and it's got a power beyond the one person by the time. And if you do that for 5 years, and I did this small book called Indelible Leadership that basically said the role of a leader is to develop collaborative cultures for 5 or 6 years to the point where they become dispensable. And it makes sense when you say it. It sounds odd at first, but if a leader's not dispensable after 5 years, they're not doing a very good job. You've got to build the culture. So that's the inside finding. But the outside finding that's equally important, and I'm working with a fellow named Lyle Kurtman, who is in Massachusetts, has identified these 7 competencies of leaders, and we wrote a book about it, and we're writing another book on it. And the 7th one has to do with partnerships and linkages. These are effective leaders who are exceptionally effective. And what he found was that those leaders, principals, that worked inside their school on instructional practice and didn't really partner outside much, were less effective at student learning and student achievement than those principals who worked on that inside but also partnered outside, both of those. So you have to go outside to get better inside. And this makes it more exciting. It is more daunting, but it also, in both of these cases, the principal is leveraging the group. And so it's not like a Lone Star hero. This is kind of leveraging it with more and more. And then when you get this liberation of teachers, still the principal's engaged in it, has to be, but they're not doing all the work themselves. They're trying to do it. They're just freeing it up and helping it focus.
Absolutely. And I think the one message that comes through in a lot of your work, if not all, and just everything you talked about today, is the importance of participatory culture, the importance of folks partnering, learning from each other, being open to your ongoing professional learning. And I feel like that really is sort of the crux of all of this. I think that's how we can really not scale, but spread. And as it looks different in different contexts, but that's how we move forward as a field collectively.
Yeah, that is core to it. And there's one rider to that, however, which is you can collaborate to do nothing or to be superficial. So the collaboration we're talking about has half a dozen key characteristics. We call it, the label we have for it now is collaborative professionalism. But there are subtleties in there. They're very important things. So one of the latest ones, again, a breakthrough we got from working with people, is we realized that autonomy and collaboration have to go together. Both of them have to happen. That autonomy is not isolation; it's connected. So that, in fact, if you collaborate, you're better off individually when you're on your own. If you're collaborating. So this part, I did there's 2 references here I want to mention. The Google education team asked me to do a blog a few months ago they did a piece of research on Finland. So they said, we're going to give you the research and ask you this question: what can foreign countries, was their terminology, learn from Finland? So I wrote this 600-word blog, and it's called Find Your Own Finland. So you see where I'm coming from that, and you can Google that by Googling. If you just Google Find Your Own Finland, you'll get that. And then Andy Hargraves and I did a big a call to action report for Learning Forward. at a session in December in Vancouver, following a study that Carol Campbell did of Canada's professional learning that fed into the conference. And we called our report, which was a call to action, but the actual title was Bringing the Profession Back In. So the profession, we meant the individual efficacy and the collective efficacy, both of those. So I think there's a caution here that don't run off and collaborate and expect that will solve the problem. You have to get in there and do it in a certain way with specificity and with a degree of subtlety, because you're giving space to people and then you're reining them in. So it's a sophisticated process and a specific one.
Right.
So I think it's going to be really good that way. Yeah.
Michael, this has been fantastic. I could talk with you all day, but I know we need to wrap up. But you've given us a lot to think about, and I think one thing that's very inspiring to me about your work is how children are always at the center, and it really is about that moral purpose of children and their learning. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us to take with us. But you've given us a lot of thinking tools and a lot of strategies to think about how we can actually empower that and open that up in our schools. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just want to underscore your last point because I have been known by focusing on the moral imperative, but what's become clear to us is almost everyone says they have a moral imperative. You can see the visions and the strategy statements, but only those who actually can show that they're moving forward on the progress on that. And that means the moral imperative by itself is not a strategy. It's a purpose, it's a goal, and you have to enable the action in relation to that, or nothing will happen.
Great words to leave with. Thank you, Michael. That was tremendous.
Okay, Mark. A pleasure talking with you. Great questions. Thanks very much.
You too. Thank you very, very much.